Heather Ousley, President, correct, of the Shawnee Mission School District School Board. Thank you so much for coming in to chat with us about some important issues in the Shawnee Mission community, which most of our viewers are probably familiar with. Let's just start at the beginning. Heather, you, the board, and the Teachers Association, Teachers Union, have been at the table for about a year, correct? Trying to reach a new contract, and both sides were unable to reach agreement. Why do you think that is?
Well, we've had significant underfunding for many years. I mean, everyone is familiar with the Brownback tax cuts and what that did to public education funding. And really, since about 2014, the Shawnee Mission School District had to swallow about $30 million worth of cuts. And this year, we are operating under a new finance formula that has been approved by the courts as constitutionally adequate, but it was a phase-in of funding. They didn't give us all of the money from the state up front. So we're actually not going to be at fully levels of adequate funding until, I believe, 2023. And
how much did you get this year?
We received $9.6 million,
Yeah.
and I would like to call it restored funding, honestly. I know
Yeah.
people have been calling it new money, but that was money that we should have had quite a while ago.
Right.
In any event, I think that with the change in the governor's office and in the change in the administration in Shawnee Mission and what sounded like a significant amount of money coming in, there was this feeling that like everything was going to be better. And what we have with regards to what we need to do to get to better, we have workload concerns at the secondary level, workload concerns at the elementary level, and then the need to also provide compensation increases year over year. And the workload level at the secondary schools, for the high school, middle schools, it's estimated to be about $5 million to hire about 70 teachers to address,
to fix that problem.
Right, to start to address the problem that was raised by the educators, which was we want to move from 6 to 5 was the talking point, because
Right.
we have 6 sections instead of 5. So
And we should be clear that the workload concerns developed in part because of the shorter funding 5 or 6 years ago.
Correct.
When you asked teachers, I say the board,
Right.
administration asked teachers to work a bit longer in part because of that financial shortfall.
Correct. And at the
Right.
time, and my colleagues and I were not on the board at the time. Well, Brad might have been, but in any event, at the time there was a increase to the base of 4% with the addition of the workload as an attempt to try and provide some sort of measure of better compensation for that, taking on that increased hour. So we have that on the table, and then the issue for lowering class sizes at the elementary level, you're looking probably about $2 million there in hiring folks. And then you have, if you're going to do base and column movement and, step and column movement and a base increase, and then provide any sort of health insurance coverage, that type of package is usually around $4 million, almost $5 million. So we came into this with 9.6 in restored funding, and then we had some additional things that we needed to pay for that we were either contractually obligated to pay for or legally obligated to pay for. And that would be an electric bill that went up, the utilities went up, transportation rates increased. We also hired on some additional paras. We were short on paras and we needed to restore some funding to our special education department. We're trying to make sure we have enough people there to get kids the minutes they need under their SPED planning time. And so by the time we got to the bargaining table with these other contractually obligated expenses that we had, I mean, I don't know how you say you're not going to staff your SPED department. We had spent down some of that 9.6 and we were dealing with around $5 million left to negotiate with.
I want to break these apart because I think they're the two main issues, which is pay and then workload. And I want to come back to break those apart a little bit. But you mentioned the other challenges you have, special education, electric bills. That would be true for all districts in our area, correct?
Right.
So why is it a problem in the Shawnee Mission District reaching agreement when we don't hear, anyway, about similar concerns in other districts in terms of paying their teachers or making appropriate workloads? Is there something we should know about the Shawnee Mission District, Heather, that is unique in terms of these extra challenges and this extra money?
Well, I think we do have, fortunately, a very experienced and talented teaching cadre. So we have people who are already kind of on the higher end of the pay scale to begin with.
More than the other districts, more than Olathe or Blue Valley. Or
Right,
some
and
of
I
the
couldn't
others.
give you specific details on that.
Right.
I mean, we could.
But just generally speaking,
we
you
have.
pay more to your teachers because they've been around longer, they have advanced degrees.
We have really good teachers.
And really good teachers.
Really good teachers.
Yeah.
And we also do have the highest average salary in the state. So for us, a percent increase costs more because we're already dealing with larger
Right.
numbers. And then in addition to that, we have an aged infrastructure. We are, a tradition of excellence. We've been around a long time. And so we don't have flexibility with other things. Like when we have building repairs that need to be made, they need to be made.
Right.
So,
Although your
there's
capital budget is apart from your
capital
operating
budget
budget.
is apart
Right.
from that, but we have expenses that some of the other districts don't have because of our aged infrastructure and because of the fact that we have an older and more experienced workforce,
Yeah.
which is good for kids. You should have, all teachers are great for kids, but it's a nice talking point that we get to say we have the best teachers.
Yeah.
Well, are you concerned at all, and we can go on to the workload
Sure, we'll get back to
later
that in a
too,
minute.
but on pay, are you concerned about the effect that this is going to have on morale? Because, a 1.5% doesn't sound like a heck of a lot if you're just looking at your own family, your own job, your own
Right.
resources. I understand that you all need to look at the entire picture, but what would you say to the teachers out there about how they should feel about what's going on and the morale?
Well, so I think there may be two facets to that. The last contract we negotiated and agreed on, the sticking point was the 1% going to be a stipend or was the 1% going to be to the base? Because the concern, when you do a stipend, it's a one-time payment and
Right.
you're done. And when your funding is unreliable moving forward, it is less of a financial risk to do the stipend. And it was a real sticking point, and the Teachers Association really fought to have that be placed in the base so that you can build on it as you go. And now at this juncture, so we have 1% to the base the first year, 1.25 the second year, and 1.5 the third year, plus step and column movement definitively agreed to be paid, and then with the health insurance of up to 7.8% the second and the third year. A year and a half ago, any bargaining team walking away from the table with that contract would have been able to say, man, we really got them to make a commitment. That is a real commitment, and cheers all around. And I think, unfortunately, because of the contentious nature of this, it's somewhat overlooked that we have managed to come a little ways from where we were just a couple years ago.
Right.
To be able to have all three of those things in the contract, and then also a commitment to begin workload adjustments in the third year, to be able to put that in writing, because we've had it in our strategic plan, we've had it in our conversations, we know that this is a top concern for folks. To be able to put that in the contract and say, okay, now we are making this commitment, it's there. I think that is, yes, it's not as much as everyone would want to give them everything that we could, but to be able to do workload adjustments in a sustainable way and to be able to continue to provide raises year over year, I think that's a good thing. And I know that that's hard, but hopefully at least now there's a light at the end of the tunnel that wasn't there before. Yes, the workload adjustments aren't until 21, 22, but that's a set event occurrence that's coming now, whereas
Right,
before you didn't have that.
I don't want to leap too much ahead
Yeah.
because we want to break this in two, but just to sort of raised the issue. While the unilaterally imposed 3-year contract would allow that, you could certainly go back in and unilaterally impose something else or try to break that. I mean, I think the teachers distrust a 3-year contract and commitments that are made, particularly when the board has argued repeatedly, Heather, as you know, that you don't have vision what the world is going to be like in 3 years. That's why there's uncertainty. Talk about that a little bit, about imposing not a 1-year contract and then revisiting this stuff, but 3 whole years. That seems unusual too.
Sure. So if there was a 1-year contract, we're already predominantly through that year. And notice letters would be going out to be back at the table, I believe, in about 6 weeks. And so we had the 9.6 million this year, but next year it's only 2.9 million in restored funding, in addition to what, whatever else is coming from the state. And that 2.9 million, that is not going to cover base and step and column and health insurance. It's not going to do it. So, but on the 3rd year, we get 5.6. And so it allows us some financial stability to be able to provide raises for everyone year over year, plus do the workload adjustments when you're able to plan it out at that effect.
But if the state says to you, no, we can't, in the 3rd year, we can't afford $5 million as a recession, we're not getting the revenue we get, then you have to go back to the teachers and say, well, it's not working out because we're not getting that kind of money. And again, I'm just trying to look at the idea of a 3-year contract rather than giving yourself and the Teachers Association some flexibility by doing a 1-year deal and then coming back and revisiting both of those issues. Because there's nothing to stop the board from reimposing another 3-year contract when this one is up, correct?
Well, it's extraordinarily unusual to go to impasse to begin with.
Which is why you're here and why we're talking about it.
Right, it's extraordinarily unusual. And I understand that there is uncertainty. This is Kansas, and we are talking about public education funding. So I inherently understand that there's risks involved with that. Elections change things. But we do have a funding formula that has been approved by the courts. The courts did not release jurisdiction over it to make sure that they could implement the funding increases what the legislature promised.
Right.
What they put in statute, it's not just promise, they made it the law. And we do have a governor right now who is committed to funding public schools. Now, I understand that that does not mean that everything is fixed and perfect. We know that there's uncertainty even with the at-risk funding. That's coming up right now. I know on Thursday they were arguing in the Education Committee over folks trying to expand the voucher program. So we know that there are risks at play, but we are in a spot right now.
Well, there's also a lot of talk of property tax reform and lids and rollbacks and other things
and
that would have some impact as well.
Black's Store theory and right. We have to make the best decisions we can based on the numbers we have available to us and based on the commitments that are in statute right now. And unfortunately, I mean, if I was going to be concerned that the money was going to run out completely forever and ever, then you don't make any commitment. Then you're back to saying, well, maybe we should just continue to do stipends every year because there's risk involved with making a future long-term commitment.
In this line of questioning, or maybe Michael wants to pursue it, but all of that would seem to argue for a 1-year deal because you don't really know what the future is going to look like. You're not sure precisely what the legislature is going to do. And then the teachers are quite angry, most of all, it seems, about a 3-year imposition rather than 1.
But how do you correct workload if you can't plan it out over the course of a couple years where you have a stable finance projection, where you know this is where money is at for 2 years, and you can say, okay, now we can work within that.
Right. But the opposite is also true. You can say after 2 years, well, we just don't have the money. We're going to do another 3-year deal and try and figure it out. I mean, and so that lack of trust was really a problem here, wasn't it, Heather, or not?
Yes, I do think that lack of trust was a problem, and that is one of the hardest parts in all of this, because I do think that some of that lack of trust was built up over many years prior to some of the new board members that were seated in 2017. Dr. Sinclair, the vice president of the board, she has sat on every PTA legislative chair position you could sit on, from her home elementary school to statewide PTA, advocating in Topeka for fully funding public schools. I have a long history of advocating for public education funding in our state. A pretty long committed history of doing it. And we have deep connected roots to a lot of educators in our community. And so it is very hard that trust discontinued after she and I and Reverend Guy were elected. The numbers were what they were, and I think that was hard to believe. When we initially said, okay, because when we were first bargaining for a 1-year agreement, the district didn't want to make the financial commitment further out because of all the reasons that you've just said.
Right.
And so when we were first bargaining over the 1-year commitment, and we said, okay, well, this is what we can commit to with regards to 1%. We can't go higher than that on the base because just dollars aren't there. And a lot of the talk at the time was, well, you're sticking a bunch of money into reserves. You're sticking money into reserves. And I actually said from the dais during a meeting, there's no money is going into reserves. No money is going into reserves. And then the conversation shifted to, well, there's money somewhere else. And the thing is when you've absorbed that many funding cuts over the last 6 or 7 years, there's not a significant number of efficiencies left to be found. And so that is a hard spot to get around.
Let's talk about climate change.
Okay.
Things seem different than they did just a few years ago. There's a lot of angst out there that working people aren't sharing equally in the economic boom here. Mm-hmm. And especially in Democrat Party circles. And you're a Democrat. I'm wondering what gives you the confidence that the community is behind the board on this, especially given the fact that I think we had some students walk out in solidarity with the teachers. Is the community behind you or not?
Well, before we voted on the contract, before it was passed, we were not able to speak because we were still at the bargaining table. Mm-hmm. And so it is really difficult to keep people believing that you're a human even when you can't speak to them on an issue for, at this juncture, what we're almost at a year. So on a topic that we have not been able to address, but other folks have clearly been able to address, and so it rightfully so, that's fine. But my hope is now that we're able to speak and we're able to say, here's some of the thought process, here's where the numbers were, this is why we did what we did. On a unilateral contract, a board has the authority to really strip things or do punitive things. And this board did none of that. We left the entirety of the negotiated agreement in place except for the additional changes that were either agreed upon at the table during this negotiation session or were putting in the financial packages for the next 3 years. This really was about the money. It had nothing to do with, we love our teachers, truly. This board is a very pro-teacher, pro-union, pro-public education board. I think, in fact, if we had someone on the board who was significantly more conservative or perhaps anti-union, in those types of situations, you probably would not want to negotiate so hard to even create a situation where there's an impasse, because there would be a real risk if they could get their hands on your contract and do whatever they want to it, then that would be bad. But that is really like the whole opposite of where we're at.
Yeah, but you don't get the sense, do you, Heather, that somehow the patrons of the district are telling you, hey, we really need to stick it to the teachers. In fact, the opposite seems to be the case.
Not at all.
That the pressure is on you to be more generous to the teachers.
Absolutely. Our community loves their educators.
Right.
My hope is that when people see the contract and read it and understand that the board really did the best that they could do under the circumstances, that we'll be able to start building bridges back to each other and fixing climate and doing those things.
Are you
but-
worried about that at all? I mean, there have been some reports of excessive sick leave from some teachers, and of course, one of the teachers' options is to quit, look for work in other
Right.
districts, which is possible. And if it's exorbitant, could leave the district with a lot of unfilled positions going forward. I mean, are you worried that those sort of more aggressive actions by the Teachers Association will impact the district, Heather, going forward?
Well, we have until next Friday for folks to sign the contract, so we'll have a much better idea of where we're going to be at by next Friday.
A week from tomorrow.
A week from tomorrow,
Right.
yeah. I'm very concerned about all of these things, and I don't think anyone on our board took any of this lightly. Honestly,
And we're not implying you took it lightly,
right.
believe
no,
me.
right, but I think this was not a, okay, yeah, let's do this one. This was, oh my gosh, how do we, thread this needle where we're giving everybody a raise, but still getting to the workload adjustments, and issuing a contract as statutory language provides.
Yeah.
You have to issue a contract once negotiations fail after it's gone to impasse. We did our very best to stick with the fact finder's report. The only tweak being to put, since he recommended using the third year money to get to 1.5%, that's when it was like, if the third year money is on the table to negotiate for the second year, then let's get the third year in so we can get the workload reductions and have
But
the
didn't he,
stability.
the fact finder also found, however, that the workload issue was something to bargain with, right? And I think the
Right.
argument of the district at some point was, this is an administrative decision that we don't need to bargain about. And he said, no, this is something that should be on the table.
Well, I think the point of clarification in the district's argument was
Yeah.
that the workload issues had not been noticed prior to the negotiation cycle.
Right.
And then when
And it sort of came up.
and then when the district went to the table, the initial and primary offers were focused on significant salary increases. And so if your three sort of things that you're looking at is salary increases, workload at the secondary level, or workload at the elementary level, and you only have so much money, if salary is the primary driving indicator, then there's not much to do with the other two workload issues. And then the conversation started to shift, I think, to be more primarily about workload, because we do have issues with that, and that was the issues that came up again and again in board meetings. And so again, if you're trying to address all the things that you can address with the money that you have, and we are basically done with the first year, the best way to get to where the fact finder wanted us to be was to just go ahead and put it in a 3-year contract.
Are you getting a lot of flack? And if so, what are people saying? And if so, what are you saying in return?
The first 2 days, an enormous amount.
So you're saying there's an enormous amount.
And how would you characterize the breakdown? I mean, was it pro-board, anti-board? Was it pro-teacher? I mean, my guess is the criticism was pretty intense.
It was very, very intense. And I think part of that was because no one had had an opportunity to read what it was that we approved until it was done. And I think a lot of the campaign to say don't vote for a unilateral contract was because, oh man, there's a lot of risk in that. Like we just previously discussed, there's a lot of risk when a board issues a unilateral contract. And I mean, I do say if I was on the other side of that, I would not want to give a board the authority to, because you don't know what they're going to do with it.
Has the board ever imposed a 3-year contract?
No, this board has not.
I mean, any board, to
any-
my knowledge. I've
so
covered the negotiations for a long time.
I think it was the Firefighters Union in Lawrence. There was a 3-year contract
Yeah,
there.
but I mean, Shawnee Mission teachers, Shawnee Mission School Board.
I believe the most has been 2 years.
And it's been a while since they've even imposed a contract. You have typically been able to reach agreement, correct?
In the
Even
Shawnee
when-
Mission School District, yes.
Yeah, and
yes.
even when times were bad. I mean, I think that's what confuses a lot of people too, is you're getting all this extra money and it's harder to reach an an agreement than it was 5 years ago in the middle of the Brownback experiment.
I mean, I wasn't there 5 years ago
Yeah.
at the table.
Right.
So I do know kind of at the beginning of the tax cuts, there was a lot of community belt tightening, like we're going to get through this and do everything we can to get through it. I mean, our district sent
Right.
out a survey saying, what do you want to cut?
I think that's
You can
what
vote on it.
that's what I've heard
And-
most from teachers, frankly, Heather, is teachers said, look, when things were going bad and the economy was bad, we all tightened our belts, we did what we could, we took on this extra hour. Now that times are good, it's time to adjust it, and they don't feel like they're getting adjusted.
Right.
I mean, that's just what you hear from every teacher you talk to.
Well, and
Almost every teacher.
I wish I had more money.
Don't we all?
I think that is fundamentally, I very much wish we had more money. I would like to be doing all of this in 1 year. I'd like to be saying, okay, we're addressing workload this year and we're still going to be able to manage to give raises to everybody and we'll get it done in 1 year. I mean, one of the things that was never really raised during the course of the negotiations was, you could do workload adjustments and have them done in 1 year, but you would then be unable to provide any raises, any step and column movement, any insurance increases. And one of the things we wanted to make sure is that however we worked our way through doing the workload adjustments and addressing compensation is that everybody got a raise. Because if you do the freeze to handle the workload adjustments, then all of a sudden you're not going to be able to give your elementary teachers a raise. And then how do you have that conversation with an elementary teacher to say, well, I'm sorry, there's no raise for you this year. We had to take care of something at the secondary level. And the other is vice versa. You could say, all right, well, we're going to reduce class sizes and then not provide a raise. And then how do you explain that to your high school teachers? Well, we had to
Right,
reduce
but what
these
we
class
argued
sizes.
about on the editorial board is the precise thing the court was saying and the legislature was saying is we're going to provide you extra money for the students. It's not really for the teachers. It's to improve the educational opportunities for the kids.
Right.
And that does mean smaller class sizes, less workload, all these other things that improve the educational experience for the student and not necessarily related to raises.
Smaller class sizes are important. Quality educators are the primary component, I think, of an excellent education experience.
Yeah.
So I absolutely value smaller class sizes. I would like us to be on a trajectory to get there, but at the end of the day, we need our quality educators. We need to keep them.
Well, let's quickly talk about workload because, having 6 classes in 7 periods, it sounds like torture to me because it seems to me like being a teacher would be like giving 6 public speeches in one day, and most people want to avoid public speeches as much as possible. Tell me a little bit about the perspective there about workload and why it's such an issue.
Well, I think it moves you up significantly in the number of students you have because you have the extra course load. And so then if, say, for our English teachers, that's that many more papers to grade with that much less time in which to do it because you don't have the extra planning time to get that accomplished. Prior to 2014, when we moved, and we say we again, I wasn't there during that decision-making process, but when the district moved to that model, it's estimated that about 40% of our staff at the secondary level were working the 6th section, but perhaps getting a stipend for it or something else, and it was voluntary, it wasn't mandatory. And so then it was the district moving to say, okay, no, everybody has to teach the 6th section. So one of the things that we're gathering data, and tell me if I'm going off course, my apologies if I am, because now I feel like I might be not sticking to the answer. In the next few months, we're getting back a demographic study about where we've got overutilization and underutilization of buildings, and information on how are we going to phase in the reduced workload. What's the best way to do that? If we can't do it all in the first year, do you do it at the middle school level the first year and then the high school level the second year? Or do you go to your core classes like your English teachers and your math teachers and say, okay, let's get those folks who have significant outside of class issues like with grading papers and try to address adjustments for those folks. And that's information being gathered right now, and Dr. Fulton has said that he's going to present the plan moving forward for how we go about the adjustments after this semester, after that research is completed.
I'd like to ask a quick question going back to the flack that you took in the immediate aftermath of this decision. How bad was it? I mean, did it take a personal toll on you? Did it rise to the level of threats or anything like that? Or tell me about that.
It's really bad. It has eased up considerably since people have had the opportunity to read the contract, and they called and said, I read it, I saw what you did, it's okay. I'm sorry this went off the rails, I'm sorry this was this. I would have done what I did even if I knew the flack was going to be what it was, because I do not know another path existed for us to provide the raises that we provided and addressing the workload in the way that we did it, because now we know that it's in the contract, it's going to be done. But none of our board members did this lightly or wanted to upset anyone in any way. We care deeply about our educators and our students in this district. And we did what we did because we wanted to do the best that we could with what we had.
Well, with that, I think we'll wrap up our conversation. Let me just ask quickly, Heather, can this breach be healed? I mean, that's obviously not just your own personal experience and that of your colleagues, but teachers feel very strongly about what they do, obviously, too, and where they stand. What's the path? Is there a path to sort of get everybody on the same page again?
So we have a great local advocacy group in Shawnee Mission called Education First Shawnee Mission, and those moms do a lot of advocacy in Topeka and advocacy here at home, and they have talked about, how they would be willing to host panels for board members, for people in the community to come and meet with us. And I've spoken with teachers who would be willing to participate in those panels. A lot of our local legislators are very committed to helping to build back bridges. We are so very fortunate. Representative Jerry Stogsdill, who serves in Topeka, he is also the former Shawnee Mission NEA president. And I had a very nice chat with him when all this was going on, and then immediately after. I may have cried on his shoulder a little bit, and he said, he was like, Heather, we're going to get through this. We're going to get through it. And he obviously has a very good relationship with our NEA Shawnee Mission president, and he knows my husband and I very well. My husband serves in Topeka. I'm sure you both know that. Yeah. And I think that we have a lot of community leaders who love this district and know the board members and also want to help our teachers, from local elected officials to advocates. I think we can get it done through relationships.
But, as someone who's lived in Johnson County for virtually my entire too long life, the school is just an extraordinarily important. I mean, the stakes are very high. The school districts, but particularly the Shawnee Mission District, has for 60 years been the centerpiece really of the Johnson County political scene, and that's why the stakes seem so high, and that's why it's so important for you guys to come in and chat with us, and we really, really appreciate it.
And the stakes are really high because what happens in Shawnee Mission is looked at throughout the state and throughout the nation. Right. And I really I want folks to know that workload adjustment piece is really critically important, because if we're not able to address workload adjustments in our district, other districts will look at what we've done and they'll say, well, they're making 6 out of 7 work. We should get that done. Correct. So it's really, really important that we get this right and get it done, because if it doesn't get fixed for us, every time a school district in this state faces funding cuts, which, Boom.
All right, Heather Ousley, thank you so much for coming in and chatting with us. It's an important thing. And